Welcome to the Dice Gods, my name is Hydra, and today we're finally going to do a video on the reinforcements rules for Infinity the game. Why finally? Well, because we had a video for this, recorded, edited, put together, ready to launch a few months back, and then CB dropped a rules update for the reinforcements, which changed about 60% of the things that we wanted to see changed. So there went that video. But we've given it a few months now and things seem to be pretty settled, so here we go again. Released in late 2023, reinforcements came in with the Endsong expansion book, which progressed the story of the Infinity universe, along with adding in some new toys to the game, including the return of the extra units for Combined Army. Reinforcements was a new way to play Infinity and added in a set of new rules which shook up the game a bit, plus an awful lot of new profiles for every faction. So far, so good. With the new profiles came a whole new set of reinforcement boxes, some of which you'll find reviewed on this here channel. Great! New minis, new rules, new story, what's not to love? Well, to be honest, reinforcements is the thing not to be loved, or so it seems. In the over half year since launch, I've yet to see a tournament using reinforcements. Most players I speak to have little to no real interest in them, and many that I have spoken to away from the local meta also feel the same. Responses have swung between meh to God no. Now, yes, this is anecdotal, but the sweeping changes CB made to the rules earlier this year led me to believe that they've also seen some issues with the mode, and potentially it's not grown in the same way they wanted to. After all, if the rules were good, they wouldn't have needed to change them. Let's be clear though, if you're having a great time with these rules, awesome, and I really do appreciate CB trying new things with Infinity. The purpose of this video is not to sneer at CB, declare Infinity dead, or to say the sky is falling. What I want to do is start a conversation about reinforcements, get my thoughts down, hear yours, and see if, as a community, we can come up with a way to make this game mode sing. That's right, people. I don't want to hear how crap you think it is in the comments. I want to see conversations, some fresh ideas, and all the things which make this community great on display. Our creativity, our openness, and our general awesomeness. Also note, this is not a newbie-friendly video. We need to dive into the rules and interactions that those have, so this isn't a new player-friendly one. You need to know your AROs from your isolated states for this to make sense. So what impact does reinforcements have on the game? Let's keep it brief and deal with reinforcements in its simplest form. Yes, there can be some changes to trooper limits, etc., but for ease, we're going with the basics. The first change is in list building. Unlike a normal game, you will have slightly more points, but these will be split with a pool of points and SWC to spend on your normal units and a separate pool to spend on reinforcements. For example, in a 350 point game, you would have 250 and 5 SWC to spend on the army you deploy on the table, and 100 points with 2 SWC for reinforcements. The reinforcements are in a combat group of their own and count towards the limit of 15 troopers in a list. The second change is that either on the second turn, if you've lost enough army points in your first turn, or automatically in the third turn, your reinforcements arrive. So in a 350 point game, for example, you need to have lost 100 points or more of your army by turn 2 to bring in the reinforcements at that point. Otherwise, you're waiting for turn 3. If you meet one of those criteria, you may then deploy your reinforcements during the tactical phase at the start of your turn. You do this by placing a 40mm marker wholly in your half of the board, then deploying all of your reinforcements within zone of control of that marker and on your side of the board. As mentioned above, these reinforcements are in their own combat group and can't be moved between combat groups until the turn after they arrive. So if they only come in turn 3, they ain't moving. You then move on to your turn as usual. Sounds interesting, right? And it is. However, we've seen a few issues in our games. Specifically, our main issues lie with list building and game flow. Let's start with list building. As discussed, the standard game is 350 points with 250 for your main force and 100 for the reinforcements, and this is a little frustrating and impacts some armies more than others. If you follow our Instagram, then you'll know I'm working on a Yuching Invincible Army force for 2024. With the points of the best units in this army getting up to between 30 and 50 points, that drop for the core group from 300 to 250 has actually quite a large impact. Where I can get a nice list with a 10 order primary group, and maybe some secondary combat group units as well at 300 points, at 250 not so much. I find that I need to compromise the quality of the core list to fit the reinforcements. My Shang-Chi Pain Train of Heavy Infantry comes in around the 200 point mark, leaving me 50 points to fit everything else in, and that's gonna suck. It's a similar story with heavy or elite armies across the board. The operations subsection of LF can also be strongly affected, and Imperial Service and military orders, and. There are quite a few examples. By comparison, Ariadne players are less impacted. Cheaper units and less need for SWC makes the change a lot easier to weather without needing to compromise the core functionality of the army. We also see that some of the reinforcement units for some factions are insanely good. No surprises that I'm looking at Mars Spiders, whilst others are simply fine. So, depending on which faction you take, it will define how much impact it has, and define the quality of the reinforcement troopers that you get. So it can have quite a different impact from one faction to the next. Next, game flow. Infinity is an intense game, and when you start that first turn, it's like being at a theme park. The roller coaster is climbing the first hill during deployment, you hit the top and over we go. No holding on, scream if you want to go faster. Well, until it's time to sort out the reinforcements. At the start of the second turn, during the tactical phase, you check your points losses, and if you've lost enough, you jump back into an effective mini-deployment phase, placing a 40mm drop pod marker, measuring zone of control from it, and placing your minis within that area, in cover, then forming fire teams. Then you have your turn and spend your orders. Then your opponent does the same maths on their turn for their losses. Then they potentially have another mini-deployment phase and place their reinforcements, fire teams time, and then they have their turn. The first issue this presents is a weird one. In a 350-point game, you have 100 points of your army off the board, and likely the only troopers that you will have to reinforce your order pool of your main combat group, because of the restrictions that 250 points presents to many forces. You likely also have a bunch of specialists in this reinforcements group too. Now, if you don't get them in turn 2, you'll never be able to move them between your combat groups, so you'll never be able to reinforce your order pool in your primary combat groups. Plus, if you got all shooty turn 1, your enemy may well have brought theirs in on turn 2. Then you're also going to need to have yours turn up on turn 2, otherwise you're going to have a big issue with your opponent having more infantry than you on the ground. This kind of puts you in a weird position. I've run reinforcement lists with a unit I wanted to sacrifice turn 1 to get my reinforcements turn 2. In one game, that was an LF Merit. I rammed it up the board, and my opponent was kind enough to oblige. He knew exactly what I was doing, and killed it for me, so thanks for that, Geo, I appreciated it. By having that sacrificial unit, you can balance units lost from your force to get the reinforcements in. Ideally, you want to lose the minimum number of orders to trigger that reinforcements arriving in turn 2. You don't want to have to sacrifice 5 or 6 miniatures to get to the 100 points of losses to bring it in, if that makes sense. I've also found myself restricting the slaughter of my opponent as well, to try and stop them getting the reinforcements into turn 3. What a bizarre situation. I want you to kill my unit, but I don't want to kill too many of yours. This is where carbonite and adhesive ammo is suddenly insanely powerful, because you can incapacitate the enemy without actually taking them off the board. And yeah, it just causes all sorts of weird equations to go off in your head, which feel very counterintuitive to Infinity as a game. Then we come to the actual deployment. This addition to the start of a turn has the effect of breaking the flow to the cinematic anarchy that is Infinity, with admin, a bit of zone control measuring, and then some deployment. This really slows the game up and breaks focus. There's nothing for the other player to do other than sit back and wait for the second mini admin phase to be over. There's no arrows, no response, just wait and see what I'm going to slap you with next. Having done this a few times, it really took me out of the game. It made it feel like a game, which Infinity often doesn't. Worse still, it also didn't feel very Infinity. I'm used to having some agency when my opponent does something. I can respond, I can have some say in the flow of the game. But instead, I sit and wait for him to land a bunch of usually very strong units right in my face. Nothing I can do. My usually switched on troopers just watching the drop pod land and taking 5 while a squad of bad guys are counted out of their seats onto the battlefield. It's also worth saying that whoever places their reinforcements second does have an easier time with placement. You kind of know where your minis are going to go, as you almost certainly need to deploy to counter the enemy's reinforcement deployment. Not doing so leaves a build-up of units which can murder ball you if they get another turn, and they likely will have punched a hole in your forces where they arrive anyway, so almost becomes a no-brainer. So reinforcement screws up list writing and breaks up the game with rules from what feels like different game. Not ideal. Based on that, it's pretty clear why people don't want to play it. If your lists are going to be messed about to fit in units which are variable between factions to make a game less fun, take longer, and just generally be less interesting, why would you? Great, okay, I've pointed at a thing and said it's broken. Go me. It's kind of the whole point of the internet, I think, at this point. But how could we fix it? Well, I've given it some thought, and this is how I think I would fix reinforcements. First things first, in list writing, I would make the points values different. A standard game I would suggest at 400 points, with 300 for the main combat group and 100 for reinforcements. Then make reinforcements in addition to the trooper limit, so you can still take 15 troopers in your core list and then another 5 in your reinforcement combat groups. For armies like military orders, invincible army, etc., this will suddenly make this a much more viable and interesting mode. Second, when the units arrive, I would provide each of the deploying units a single burst one shot, and the enemy, the reactive player, AROs. AROs are worked out by the active player being able to move each deploying trooper up to 8 inches from the edge of the drop pod marker. The reactive player can then ARO to that deployment at any point along that movement. If the trooper comes out of the drop pod and stays in contact with the drop pod, it still counts as having moved and out of cover, so may be ARO'd. The drop pod then remains on the board and becomes a Silhouette 7 piece of terrain which provides cover. So what just happened is your troopers came screaming in from orbit, the doors fly open, they sprint for cover under a hail of bullets, heads still spinning from the plunge through the atmosphere. They wildly return fire as they scramble for cover. Oh, hello Infinity feeling cinematic moment. Deployment then becomes a lot more like a coordinated order, with all the risks, rewards, concerns and thoughts involved in that. And yes, arriving does attract AROs like normal. That means mines work, hidden deployment nasties can spring a devastating response to the new arrivals. The new arrivals can be hacked, they can be spotlit. All kinds of bad things can happen. But, as with a coordinated order, each reactive trooper only generates a single ARO to that deployment, so can only respond to one of the arriving reinforcements. This not only feels more Infinity, for the most part, it's based on existing rules. It's a coordinated order that happens at the start of a turn. Finally, how would I change how and when reinforcements can come in? Simply, I'd make it work like this. Turn 1, you can bring in your reinforcements based on a whip -9 roll against the whip of your comlink unit. Turn 2, that becomes a whip -3, and turn 3 remains automatic arrival. This roll happens at the start of your tactical phase and is made by spending a lieutenant order from your pool. That does mean that if you are loss of lieutenant, you can't bring in reinforcements that turn. If your comlink unit is dead, you roll against whip 10, modified as we discussed above. I would then adjust some other elements of the game. There would be a new strategic use for command tokens. During deployment, you could spend 1 command token to give yourself a +3 to reinforcement rolls for the game. This expenditure would be open information and the decision made at the start of each player's deployment phase. I would also amend the controlled jump program for Evo hackers to include a +3 to whip for reinforcement rolls. This gives extra value to the Evo hacker and gives players another way to buff their chances of getting their second team on the ground. Theoretically, combining both the new strategic use and the controlled jump program would see a player rolling against whip -6 on turn 1 by using the command token rather than -9. Then at whip +3 in turn 2 if they also had the Evo hacker and have activated the control jump program, which stack both the command token and the control jump program together. There's still a chance to be without your troopers until turn 3, but you have some say in that without relying on your opponent slaughtering your troops. By giving players the chance to bring in reinforcements turn 1, we increase the value of those units and remove the need to rely on losing troopers for their 100 points of new troopers to arrive. You can start to plan on their arrival as part of your mission tactics. It becomes something that you have agency and control over, and not a sign that things have gone horribly wrong because your opponent's been slaughtering your troops. Now, it's a little rough around the edges and frankly needs a lot of playtesting, but what do you think? Would you be tempted to try this version of reinforcements? If so, let us know and we'll put together a little rules pack and maybe submission ideas that we have as well. Also, let us know in the comments if you've tried reinforcements, and if you have, if you agree with the issues we see there. Thanks as ever to our lovely channel members and patrons, including the most handsome Joe Rogers. We appreciate you guys being on Team Dice Gods. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up to validate our existence, subscribe and share the video far and wide. We'll be back with more good stuff soon, but for now, thank you for watching and we will see you again soon.